It's time to break into tax. I'm Leandra Lederman.
And I'm Allison Christians. Today's topic, how to ask a good question at a tax policy colloquium. All right, Leandra, you're sitting in tax policy colloquium and a question occurs to you while the speaker is speaking. That's great, right? You write it down. And if they say, oh, this is something we want to discuss later, you think, okay, yeah, that is something I'd like to hear some more about. You write that down and you're ready to go. But what should you do if you're sitting there and you're listening and you're thinking, this is really interesting, but I'm not sure how to break in? How do I work out how to contribute to this discussion?
Well, there are some tools that you can always use. And one is, for example, is it clear if the author is making a normative point as opposed to simply a positive point? If it's not clear, you might ask about that, or you might think about, well, what would a normative take be? Another possibility is you could bring in the tax policy criteria of equity, efficiency, and administrability and think about how the author's thesis or project implicates those criteria, or is there something missing you could ask about?
Another option is to think about whether the author is making a policy proposal that lawmakers might actually consider. In which case you might ask a question about, how that kind of law might implicate other kinds of laws or how that's actually going to work, the practical aspects of that.
Is the proposal politically viable? And if not, is that a problem? Is it meant to simply be a thought experiment? Or if the speaker is advocating for legal change and the particular proposal has political barriers to it, does the speaker have a backup plan? Relatedly, things like who is the audience for this paper, if that's not clear? Is the speaker talking to policymakers or just talking to fellow academics, for example?
On occasion, you could ask whether the problem that the author seeks to solve is actually a tax problem.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There is a risk that a tax expert is bringing tax to something where there actually could be non-tax solutions that might be less costly or easier to accomplish.
We're interrogating the idea itself. Is it a normative idea or a positive idea? And we're thinking about the practical implications of that idea. And I think that gives the author something to work with in thinking about how to develop the paper a little further. And so now we're going to just think about kind of questions that we don't encourage or don't think are that useful. Not always from students. These are not always the questions that students ask, but these are questions that sometimes arise in the colloquia that we think, let's get rid of them. Let's not have questions like this anymore. And I would put at the top of that list the I didn't read your paper, but question, and the I'm not a tax lawyer, or I don't have any tax expertise, or I don't know what I'm talking about, but type of lead in to a question. I think we should just get rid of that language altogether in tax policy colloquium.
Yeah, so some of it is framing. Like, you don't necessarily need to take the time to say that you're not a tax expert. You can just bring your question in, and it might be informative to say, well, I'm a patent expert, for example, and we have encountered this type of issue in the patent space. And so here's an analogy that might be useful to you.
Yeah.
For example, and that's a lot more informative than saying I'm not a tax expert, implying so you should maybe discount what I'm about to say.
Yeah, stop asking the speaker to discount you. That's not useful to anyone. Okay, and then another type of question that I'd like to get rid of and not have them occur is the kind of question that if you just were on your phone on the side, you could look it up in a minute before the author has time to answer it. This is a fine question to have, but it's not one that you need to take up colloquium time to answer.
If your question has already been asked, if you can figure out a way to push on it further or reframe it so it's getting at something a little bit different.
Something that I really do like to see, if you are repeating a question or you're sort of expanding on a question, is to actually go back and say, well, such and such person asked this, and you, the author, responded, and I wanted to come back to that.
Yes, I think it can work really well to reference strands that have come from multiple different people. And some colloquia have a system where you can jump the queue if your question is directly related to the conversation that's going on right then. A type of question that is often, I think, sort of joked about is the one that's not really a question, but it's a really lengthy comment. And there can be time for that, and that can be really valuable, but that also sort of has to be used judiciously.
Even a kind of a longer question that takes some getting up to speed, so long as you're engaging with the author. If you're not sure that you're engaging with the paper, then probably you're giving a lecture.
And there's also a judgment call. What if you have 3 or 4 questions? Maybe this is directly in your area of expertise and you have a lot of things you want to say and a lot of things you want to ask about.
Maybe pick 1 or 2 that you really care about and save the other ones for the after discussion. So I would say, to sum up, obviously in a tax policy colloquium, the idea is to have an engaging discussion, and asking the right question at the right time is the way to get that conversation going and to contribute to it.
Thanks for joining us as you break into tax.
See you next time.